I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
I'm your other co-host, Dean Ditloff. Jingle, jingle. It's Christmas time.
Hey, great. I appreciate you doing the Foley work there for that one. Everyone knows it's Christmas time. Well, it's not quite Christmas time. It's still Advent, but I think the jingles are more than warranted.
Yeah, it's Christmas time. It's not Christmas exactly, but it is just sort of the time orbiting Christmas. Christmas time goes from, in Canada, it goes from Halloween until just after the New Year, I think. In the US, Thanksgiving sort of pushes it off, or it shortens the window. But yeah, it's been Christmas time around here for a while.
It's bonkers. I can't believe that. The absence of American Thanksgiving in Canada, it makes Christmas so long. I can't believe it.
It's so weird. It also makes Thanksgiving so weird because Thanksgiving is in October before Halloween, and it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know how to do two holidays in 1 month and then nothing in November. Yeah, it's out of control. Anyway,
there's a post-liberal theologian out there who's like, yes, of course, the liturgy of the year.
That's right. Yeah, one lonely Canadian post-liberal theologian who's really psyched that is actually the tempo of our civil society. That person is a nerd, and I do not want to think about them anymore. Instead, I want to think about Advent. It is the last Advent week before Christmas, and I think it's the toughest one for this podcast specifically, a podcast about Christianity and the left. If you thought that getting some hope together in week one was tough, if you thought about thinking about peace last week when the U.S. was inflating the military budget during a pandemic was difficult, wait till you hear that this week the theme is joy. That's right, it's joy. I think it's pretty tough to be joyful right now in the face of everything that's going on. Maybe it's even good to refuse to be joyful. Who knows? I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but we are going to live it in this particular way. We did decide that we were going to lean into trying to figure out how to embrace the Advent themes this year, so we're going to go for it. We're going to see if we can sort out how to talk about having joy at the end of the world when everything is on fire and everything around you in the news looks bad. How can you even figure it out?
Yeah, it is definitely a hard time to be joyful, and in this podcast, we're going to really go through it. We're going to go through some, we'll paint a picture of the end of the world and what it looks like at this moment, this ending of the world at least. Yeah, you never know. It could always end in a different way in the future. But we talked about, peace and hope as sort of political ideas, but I think we're going to do something very similar with joy. It is very hard. It's very easy to just throw your hands up, see how bad things are, and kind of, think of it all as a wash, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about joy in the context of politics, there's actually something really subversive about joy that I think that we can maybe talk through here in light of all of the bad things that are happening. Joy in this maybe subversive sense is that things are very bad. The people who are in power are doing very bad things to you and will end up, harming a lot of people. But there's still a sense in which, that's not the last word, I think, on history, right? Things aren't over. The struggle is not finished. I'm feeling very evangelical saying these things out loud, but you get what I'm saying, right? There's this like sense in which if you are, if you have a sort of sense of joy, you still believe that the world can be transformed, that things don't have to end the way that they are, laid out before you. So in this episode, we're going to talk through the bad things. We're gonna get you to your like a great Thursday night at church camp. We're gonna get you to your lowest point and tell you about all of the bad things in the world, and then we're gonna bring you up to the highest heights and tell you about joy and the revolution that is still possible. I guess. Dean, what do you think? Is that okay?
I think it's okay. Yep, take me there. Get me as low as I can go, Matt. I'm gonna let you take the elevator down, and maybe I'll try to bring us back up. We'll see.
All right, all right. I'll do my best here. Okay, so let's see. How can we start painting the dystopia that our world is right now? I think that this idea kind of first struck me about joy earlier today when I read this Vox article called "The World as We Know It Is Ending. Why Are We Still at Work?" I read that while I was working, and it made me ask some pretty tough existential questions. Why am I doing this? No, it's just kidding. I know why. But anyways, it's a really it's a very sort of funny framing of the question, and it's projecting a little bit and maybe being a bit melodramatic, but that's okay. A little melodrama is not bad every now and again, but I think it's an interesting question, right? Like, how work gets done in coronavirus pandemic time is a very interesting and like um, kind of now just sort of assumed answer. People just go to work and kind of keep working through it. But if you'll recall, there was a time when people did not just assume that you're going to keep working. Like restaurants were closed, stores were very limited in the times they were open. Everyone with sort of a white collar job was working from home. Everyone else, was working, but sort of in limited capacities. And there was like this time where it seemed like, even the progressives in the United States were suggesting that the government should just pay people to stay at home so that, we could like get some distance from COVID. And in retrospect, that seems all very utopian based on where we are now. So, um, to maybe get a better picture of this, I'm going to read the opening paragraphs and then the concluding paragraph of this article, and we can maybe talk through it a bit. The article starts off like this. A novel coronavirus was sweeping the globe, and leaders and experts recommended that the US pay millions of people to stay at home until the immediate crisis was over. These people wouldn't work. They'd hunker down, take care of their families, and isolate themselves to keep everyone safe. With almost the whole economy on pause, the virus would stop spreading, and Americans could soon go back to normalcy with relatively little loss of life. Obviously, that didn't happen. Instead, white collar workers shifted over to Zoom, often with, kids in the background, which, man, that sucked. And everybody else was forced to keep showing up to their jobs in the face of a deadly virus. Hundreds of thousands of people died. I think as of a few days ago, it's 800,000 people in the United States. Countless numbers of people descended into depression and burnout, and a grim new standard was set. Americans keep working even during the apocalypse. Okay, that's the opening of the paragraph, and I want to read kind of the concluding sentiments because I think it's kind of just hammers home the point. So the article ends like this. Overall, surviving the disaster of the 21st century will require a new kind of strength from Americans, not the dogged persistence to keep doing our jobs while the world falls down around us, but the empathy and generosity to come together and to stop the collapse. As Jacob Reams put it, who's a historian, nothing is possible when we all have to pretend to be independent all the time, which is a great ending line. But you get the kind of gist of the article just from these paragraphs alone. At the beginning, we have these like very, I don't know, lofty ideas about how we would handle coronavirus, COVID. I don't know why I call it coronavirus. Like, I don't know, no one says that anymore. How we'd handle COVID as like a society. And those ideas did not pan out whatsoever. And in fact, I mean, things were just bad and they still are bad, right? But the suggestion at the end is like, I don't know, something has to give. People have to change the way they think about things to practice a different type of, way of life. But not seeing a lot of that honestly on the horizon either. But the the suggestion is not falling on deaf ears. I'm all about it right now. I think that sounds like a good plan. But okay, so this is maybe one piece of the very bad landscape that we got going right now. COVID is bad, but no one's boss thinks it's so bad that you shouldn't show up for work, and
Hmm.
that's the thing. Like, I guess it's even so bad that like I've seen some news articles recently using the phrase post pandemic as if the pandemic is
Hmm.
over, or like all of the quote unquote essential workers who might have been making a few extra bucks, of hazard pay or whatever. That's all sort of ended. What I'm trying to say is everyone's boss thinks that the pandemic is over,
Right.
while it actually is still very bad.
Yeah, I even saw just recently a tweet that was like somebody saying if you have a bad cold or you feel yucky or whatever, I don't even care if you have a negative test, just stay home. And there was like a number of kind of, I don't know, progressive type people that I saw on my Twitter feed sort of retweeting it in a celebratory way. But I thought to myself, to say something like that without also saying like, and that's why we need paid sick days is like a really good encapsulation maybe of the limitation of the political imagination in the U.S. Even the people on the leftish side are kind of moralizing rather than strategizing, and that's a dangerous precedent for bad times.
Yeah, totally. No paid sick leave, no like family leave,
Right.
nothing. Everyone just kind of has to show up to work. Um, Man, I feel like whatever bad situation does exist in the United States is always sort of multiplied by 10 if you talk about Missouri, where
Mm.
I live. Um, there's all kinds of politicians here who are pushing to overturn mask mandates. Um, in a handful of places in Missouri, like schools no longer can mandate masks. So like kids can't wear them, or I mean, kids can wear them, but like no one's going to make anyone do it. So,
Hmm.
a lot of kids just won't, which is bad. But also it means that like a lot of COVID mitigation stuff ends up just kind of falling to the wayside. Like, I don't know if local authorities can't really make laws about mask wearing, they also can't make laws about if you can't come to school if you have COVID or whatever, right? So now
Hmm.
that's been happening, and like schools been closing. It's been a whole thing. All that to say, yeah, I mean, like the reactions people have to the pandemic at this point are just like willful ignorance, or, or wishing it's over, um, or just kind of being okay with like some people dying. Well, they sort of remain safe. But yeah, I mean, COVID is still bad. I guess it's still a
Hmm.
complete horror show.
So we've gone down one floor here on this elevator to bad news at the bottom. Why don't you take us down one more floor again, Matt? Start bringing us to the bottom so that we can build back better when we get there.
Oh my god. Okay, yeah. Well, the next bad floor, the next rung down the ladder of a joyless dystopia is I guess, some news about climate change. I mean, it's bad, right? We've been talking about the IPCC reports. We've been talking about, I don't know, all kinds of different things around climate catastrophe and change, and how that might shake out. Anyways, I saw this article. It's from, well, this means nothing. It was from yesterday. Anyways, the title is "The Antarctic Ice Shelf Could Crack, Raise Sea by Feet Within Decades," scientists warn.
Mm.
Some real apocalyptic kind of stuff. Okay, so the article is not that long. It's from NBC, and it's really just kind of a pretty quick gloss, but I'll read these parts of it here. An Arctic ice shelf could crack and disintegrate within the next decade, allowing a Florida-sized glacier to slide into the ocean and raise sea levels by feet. The glacier is called Thwaites. Thwaites is the widest glacier in the world and has doubled its outflow speed within the last 30 years. That means it's like moving faster towards the ocean than it has been
Mm.
previously. And when they get to the ocean, it's bad because like that's when they melt and raise sea levels, etc. Okay, some stuff going on there. So then a scientist from the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences says this: if Thwaites were to collapse, it would drag most of West Antarctica ice with it. So it's critical to get a clear picture of how the glacier will behave over the next 100 years. So, it is a pretty big deal. You don't want this to happen for a lot of reasons. Ice melting, it raises the sea level, which displaces humans, which causes, climate refugees, and it does all kinds of other awful things to the larger sort of like chains and webs of like food and ecosystems and stuff. It also like when ice melts, it also releases whatever carbon like or whatever might be like frozen within the ice, so that's also bad. Um but I guess all this to say that like the I don't know, the things that you hear about in like horror movies or like natural disaster movies or that you read about in, I don't know, textbooks at school, like are actually going to happen. And you kind of have sort of scientific evidence that this is occurring, and it's going to happen quick. So scientists are kind of figuring out, not really. I mean, I guess they could try to figure out how to stop it. That'd be cool. It'd be a huge feat of engineering for sure to do that, but also like just trying to figure out like what it's going to do, I think is kind of like the more terrifying part.
Yeah, it'd be a huge feat of engineering and also a huge feat of like public and political will. Especially when the world's like most dangerous emitter is also full of like elected climate change deniers. So
Yeah.
hard to figure that out. Yeah, this kind of stuff is always hard for me to get my head around. Maybe that is by design in some ways, I can't really tell, but it's like difficult to imagine what you can even do about situations like that, like we spoke about when we talked about the IPCC report, right? Hard to really think about it in any other way that doesn't just devolve into like socialism or barbarism, I guess. The old Marxist cliche in that way. Except in this, it's not just barbarism, it's like socialism or ecocide or something. I don't know. It's bad news. You're right, Matt. We've gone another floor down, and the situation is getting worse. How are we going to find joy in such a terrible, terrible elevator?
Yeah, let me give a quick plug here. I thought this was a particularly, I mean, this is a really scary thing for sure. It's like you said, socialism or ecocide. It is like a huge existential threat to the entire world in the worst way. But I guess I thought this was really interesting because this exact thing is something that happens in the Kim Stanley Robinson book, The Ministry of
Oh,
the Future. So I don't know. It's a very weird thing to see something in a science fiction book intersect with reality so acutely. I think that's really a big bummer.
Mhm.
In the Kim Stanley Robinson book, though, it is very funny because they figure this whole situation out. Basically, the solution in the book is that they, well, okay, so there's like this like sort of United Nations organ put together called the Ministry for the Future, and they have like basically unprecedented political power in the world, and they are able to drive most of like the oil companies kind of like basically out of business. So instead of them like all losing their jobs, they hire the oil companies to use their oil pumps that they usually use to pump oil out of the seafloor or whatever to pump water out from underneath the from underneath the glaciers, so the glaciers would stop sliding so fast. But I guess like that's to me like such a troubling thing, right? Like it's interesting because like in science fiction you get to read all kinds of like kind of fantastical wild but like maybe plausible solutions to something. And I don't know if that really is plausible or not. I'm not an engineer to know, but it's such a wild thing because it's like that might be the answer and it's probably impossible to do. So it is such a weird thing though to see kind of like repeat itself in real life,
hmm
after just having read a big book about it. So
Man, of all the sci-fi things that could have come to life, I don't like that one. That one is not only bad news but also boring. I want something exciting. Some aliens have to get involved here. I want Men in Black maybe to come to life. You know, I don't know. This is an aside. Probably shouldn't talk about it on this podcast. We should save it for the walk-in. I was just gonna say something about Men in Black and immigration, but yeah, I'll save it. It's not. It's not the time.
an incredible teaser for the lock-in. Whatever that is that you're gonna say, people are probably on the edge of their seats.
I'm definitely gonna forget by the time we get around to it. So I'm sorry to disappoint in advance. But Men in Black and immigration. I don't know. See what that does for you specifically, dear listener.
See what it does. Okay. Let's go. This isn't. I don't know if this is like an adjacent rung on the ladder. This is another ladder sitting by the climate change one. It's hard to tell. But this is another bad thing that's going to happen. Hopefully you're ready for it, Dean. I imagine you are. Okay, so let's see. Towards like in November last year, if you'll recall, there was an election. to see who was going to be the president, if it was going to be Joe Biden or this big orange Cheeto that we all hate so very much, Donald Trump. If it's going to be Grandpa Ice Cream or this big orange Cheeto. And it turns out that Joe Biden won, and we did have a few episodes where we talked about, like, I don't know, what's Joe Biden doing? What could this possibly mean for politics? We were trying to be like smart Leninists and kind of figuring out like the electoral scene and maybe what it had to say for socialists or what socialists could say about it or something, right?
Mhm.
Anyways, Biden has had all these plans about labor and the minimum wage and all kinds of other things. And I gotta say, they didn't exactly pan out, and that's putting it lightly. But there was a pretty large social safety net plan that Joe Biden was really putting together. Everyone's fave, Bernie Sanders, was behind it at the beginning. This thing called the Build Back Better plan. But it was this like gigantic social safety net plan that would do all kinds of pretty good things for people materially speaking. At the beginning, it was I couldn't remember. It was like $7 trillion or whatever. It was just like an ungodly amount of money, but it was like for something that wasn't bombs, so that was pretty cool to me. Anyways, the if you're following the news around this whole thing at all, you'll know that recently, uh, Joe Biden, the president, he says that, well, this big thing, this big bill that's been kind of whittled down over time. They wanted to pass it before Christmas. They wanted to pass it before the new year, but now it doesn't seem like it's going to come to a vote until after the new year, which is a pretty big problem within this whole plan, within the social safety net sort of legislation. You get things like extending the child tax credit, which has been a really essential source of income for people with children, especially low income people. You got things like paid family leave and paid sick leave. Earlier on, this is kind of not related to Build Back Better directly, but you have things like rental assistance and stuff even. But all of this is sort of gone, and we're not going to see any of it sort of we're not going to see any of it sort of renewed or re-injected into our political situation until at least after Christmas. And still, I mean, like, who knows what'll happen after Christmas, right? It all kind of hinges on like a handful of very heartless politicians being dumb. So I don't know. I mean, will it get passed eventually? I honestly don't know. It could completely tank. It could not. Maybe it'll pass. I don't know. It seems like Democrats are going to try to also start pushing a different type of legislation about voting rights, and maybe that will pass, which, I mean, it's also important too. But all I'm trying to say is that, like, this thing that they wanted to move very quickly on is now not happening, and it's going to have, pretty bad ramifications for like working people in the United States. I saw a tweet today from Bryce Covert, who's some kind of journalist. I don't know much about them. They're probably fine. I don't know. The tweet was good though. So they said we're heading into this winter with the Omicron wave without expanded employment benefits, without any guarantee of paid sick leave. The like paid protection or paycheck protection plan is over. Rental assistance has stopped flowing in some states, and there's no federal eviction moratorium. So there's like no safety net, right? And this is, I think, this is as bad as it gets politically. At the very top of the episode, I was talking about all the bad things that happened around work and COVID, and people still have to show up for work. And I don't know, it's going to be more of the same. All of the most basic necessities that like basically every other country has, like paid sick leave. We're not going to get in the United States. We're not going to see it. Evictions are going to keep happening, and it's going to be awful, right? So that's bad. That's it's hard to find joy in that situation.
Yeah, more like Build Back Bummer. Am I right?
Yeah, man, you're
put that
right.
one on your.
You're
You
right.
can put that one on your stationery and send it to Joe Biden and see if that gets you anywhere.
I mean,
Um,
Joe Biden, for as bad as he is, a person who I don't personally like that much. I mean, this isn't necessarily his fault, but it's also not his fault too, and then that's fine. It's just like it's all of these different like raging and roiling politicians
Yeah.
just like doing something that like clearly they know what they should be doing, right? Like this is not even that that extensive. It's like only $1.7 trillion now. It's come down so far, and like clearly nothing that radical is even kind of in this, but they are resisting to do the right thing.
Hmm.
And I don't know, Joe Biden needs to take him out for ice cream or whatever and tell him what to do. But it doesn't seem like I don't know. They're gonna go on Christmas break, and a bunch of people are gonna get evicted during Christmas or whatever. And I don't know. That's all there's gonna be to it.
Yeah, that is not good, and I don't like it. Maybe now that we're kind of at the bottom floor here of all these bad things, I hope at least, unless you have some other secret bad stuff to tell me about in a minute. But
There's always more.
There's always more. But it's good to also pull the camera back a little bit from the US and contextualize all this kind of stuff more globally too, right? Like even in Canada, where I am, which I said is truly marginally better for sure than the US, here too, many of the things in that tweet that you just said are not present anymore, right? We had like a pretty extensive government assistance program that did pay a lot of people, not enough for sure, but definitely not nothing to stay home. That has evolved in ways that have made it definitely less accessible than it was. Rental assistance is not present. Evictions are back on pretty much across the entire country. And our numbers now are like skyrocketing pretty quick. And there's no real talk, at least that I've seen, of any kind of response in the news to that federally or provincially. And even to expand a little bit further, you know, these kind of variants are only going to proliferate as like the world continues to hoard vaccines in the first world, as distributions of vaccines and other kind of COVID health measures and so on are not really equitably shared around the global south and so on. And I think that is really important, right? To always be kind of realizing that these are global issues, and what sort of like for all the bad things that happens in the United States, it will have like, you know, several other knock-on effects in countries where people are worse off and poorer and already struggling to deal with the effects of the pandemic. So all that to say, Matt, we're at the bottom. It feels bad, and oh my gosh, I'm starting to think of things that make it feel even worse.
That's right. I mean, it's really hard to see past the dystopia. It's hard to see past all the very bad things, but it's still somehow important, I think, to figure out, you know, how to comport yourself towards all of that horror. There is a pretty significant, I think, vibe generally in in the United States. I'm sure it exists in Canada too. That sort of, I don't know, nihilism is sort of the option. Maybe if not not in name, in in comportment, in practice at least. You know, I'm sure no one out there is just like saying they're a nihilist, but at the same time, that's how a lot of people do act for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a good thing though to think through how to figure out these situations. I mean, they have political solutions for sure, but sometimes those political solutions seem really difficult. Like we talked about last week, that hope is on a tightrope, and the tightrope is extremely, I don't know, precarious. But there's something. But you know, I guess politics aside, Christianity gives us a certain type of way of being in the world that is not despairing, that's not nihilistic, and it's something else, right? There's a different sort of feeling. So and joy is exactly what the idea that we're trying to get at here, right? This week in Advent, we're supposed to be focused on joy, and what does it mean that that Mary can sing the Magnificat in Luke? What does it mean that Jesus is coming and is going to live, you know, a really live as a worker and sort of preach to the least of these? What does that joy mean in the midst of all the horror?
Yeah, you know, the thing that came to my mind, even as you were just saying that, was Paul Virilio, a really weird French person that we talk about on this podcast a handful of times. He is a Roman Catholic and also, I don't know, has a very bleak view of the kind of society that we have now, which he sees as like totally militarized and not good. There was a really interesting interview I remember reading with him where somebody was asking him about him being a Christian. And he was like, yeah, you know, like the crucifixion, all that stuff, it's there, it's part of the faith. But he said he described himself as being like an incarnation Christian, that for him, Christmas was always more important than Easter. And he had this quote about sort of like where Mary appears to people in history. And he says it's always where danger grows. And it's those kind of like apparitions or like moments of presence or affirmation that like God is present in creation through the incarnation. That's kind of what like gives him some way of sort of coping with the bleakness of his own articulation of the world. And if you ever read Paul Virilio, it's like, man, if listening to a few minutes of this podcast makes you feel a little bummed out, like Virilio will make you feel very bad. So I think, but there's something that's always kind of stuck with me about that, right? That for Virilio, it's like Mary appears where danger grows. So if danger is growing, you know, you can sort of count on the person who sings the Magnificat to be there. Or the incarnation functions in this really interesting way as like a pressure valve, maybe to let some of that pressure out, right? And to say, okay, what would it mean to say God is with us or something in the middle of all that danger? So yeah, it's good to maybe pivot now to talking a little bit about joy and sorting that out with knowing that the more danger there is, the more chance maybe there is for something else to happen.
Yeah, something else to happen, or that joy can give you the upper hand in a situation, or it can mean something symbolic but also materially important for you and the people that are struggling with you. I think like it's really hard to talk about joy in the sense of Christmas. I mean, you know, the incarnation for sure is a big theological idea, but there's also lots of ideas about eschatology kind of wrapped up in joy.
And Advent.
Yeah, in Advent for sure, right? It's like okay, I mean Paul Virilio, he's all about Christmas, not Easter, but like in a lot of ways they're very related holidays and the kind of perspective they're supposed to give you about, you know, time and the world and whatever. Thinking through that a bit though, you can see the ways that like Christian, like this sort of like idea of joy in Advent is really wrapped up in the eschatology of like you know, God sort of has the last word in the world, not all these bad things, right? Like climate change is extremely bad. Well, this is actually a good Paul Virilio point, maybe, right? Through climate change or through nuclear destruction or whatever, the world can end. It can end in one big boom, but that does not mean like the end of creation. It doesn't mean like the end of time. It doesn't mean like the end of political struggle. He Paul Virilio, this is a moment in a book of interviews called Gray Ecology, where he says that he's not a revolutionary but a revelationary, right? That these moments where something bad happens, something is revealed that could be really important to you, in a political sense or in maybe a religious sense or something. But that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about eschatology, is like what happens in the end, or like when it comes to all of these bad things, like what really wins out in the end? Does the world have this sort of slow devolution towards, I don't know, complete destruction? Is it a moment of socialism or barbarism, or is there some kind of like better world that is actually possible? So eschatology is asking that kind of question, and Christianity has a real specific answer to that, right? That like at the end of the world, there's sort of the redemption of all people. It's, you know, the world's reconciled to God, and all these kinds of great things happen. And Christmas is about that sort of like salvific moment, or it's like the initiating point of that salvific moment in history. But what's interesting about joy is joy in this like sort of eschatological sense is that like if you are, you know, among the oppressed people or whatever, or you've decided to throw in your lot with them, uh, joy kind of gives you like this like weird subversive upper hand. You know, like you're feeling joyful, you're feeling hopeful, you're feeling peaceful about the world, even when you know, your oppressors think that maybe you shouldn't. They think that they've won, they think that they've beaten you down, they think that you're compliant or whatever. There's still this sense of joy that can I don't know, get you through those moments and then like figure out what to do in them.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me directly of something from Gustavo Gutierrez, a Peruvian liberation theologian who's really interesting and cool, and someone we should probably talk about more on this podcast. We talk about a handful of other liberation theologians. I don't think we ever really get into Gutierrez, which is wild because he's one of the main original people involved. But yeah, he also has a lot of interesting things to say about like the joy of the poor or the particular position of the poor, and how that joy kind of like pierces through the dark canopy of oppression, if you will. I was actually just looking at this book by Robert McAfee Brown, who was a Presbyterian theologian, really interesting guy. He wrote a ton of stuff about liberation theology. He was from the U.S. He wrote a book called Gustavo Gutierrez, An Introduction to Liberation Theology in, I don't know, like the 80s, maybe even 1980. Anyway, in it, he has this little section called The Joy of the Poor that I was just looking at as we were thinking about this episode. And he summarizes Gutierrez talking about the joy of the poor. Gutierrez was speaking in Detroit, and Robert McAfee Brown says, Gutierrez moved in a direction unanticipated by his largely North American audience. He spoke about the need to recognize the joy of the poor. On the lips of a North American speaking out of a life of reflective affluence, the theme would have sounded romantic or callous, but coming from within Gustavo's lifelong immersion in the midst of the poor, it opened new doors to his hearers. It's not enough, he reminded them, to recognize only the sufferings of oppressed persons, real as they are. It's also necessary to recognize the poor know joy. It is a joy expressed in songs, festivals, poetry, the reenactment of old customs and religious ceremonies. It is a joy that does not ignore or forget past indignities. Indeed, it grows out of them by affirming that they are not the last word. The last word belongs not to indignities, but to God, and the poor know that God's word, however long deferred, is a good word, and that history finally belongs to God, not the oppressor. And then he goes on to say also a little bit, oppressors cannot understand this laughter of the poor and are unnerved by it. The suffering of others can sometimes elicit compassion and sensitivity, even among those with hardened hearts, but joy, such a response is incomprehensible and even frightening to those whose ears are closed to a message that the future belongs to the poor rather than to them. So this joy is subversive. Very cool passage, very fun. Maybe we can spend some time like breaking that out a little bit. I really like the idea that joy is subversive just by virtue of like not accepting the terms set by oppression. And I also like that joy, it is subversive maybe precisely because it's not necessarily setting out to be subversive. Like it's just kind of, you can't necessarily stamp out the light totally from people. It's a fact of life. And what it means is, there's always going to be a trace that sort of didn't get, thrown into the fire of oppression or something. And that's a really helpful, important word, I think.
Yeah, I think that's good. A good place to start with it. There are two places. I mean, amidst all these bad things that I was just kind of reading out a bit ago, there are two places I've seen like real legitimate joy. I think that has been pretty revolutionary, I guess, in the way it's been expressed in the last few weeks. So one of them, this is, I mean, kind of like something I just saw unfold online, but this big coalition of activists in Kansas City, they started a campaign to make sure that when people were evicted, they had access to they not access to they got legal representation. As it turns out, if you go to court for, I don't know, committing some kind of crime or whatever, and you can't pay for a lawyer, you get like a public defender. But when it comes to evictions, you don't, and that sucks. So, I mean, the situation actually becomes pretty dire because, of course, your landlord can afford a lawyer, can afford representation because, like, they're a landlord, right? And you gave them all your money, so of course they can afford it. But people who are being evicted, unsurprisingly, cannot afford a lawyer as readily. So, anyways, they start this campaign to guarantee legal counsel for people facing eviction. And like they pushed really hard and they won and they like got it. And now Kansas City is like one of like 9, cities in the country or something like that guarantees legal counsel to people facing evictions, which like, I mean, okay, that's maybe the larger story is that like evictions are evil in the first place and like they shouldn't exist. And like, sure. But like, as far as tenants' rights go, as far as like, a campaign in a city, that's not nothing, right? And when they won, I mean, I don't know, there's all kinds of videos of the coalition of all the activists like in that's like city council meeting, and they're like losing their minds. They're super happy, right? That's like legitimate joy. And there's a type of revolutionary optimism, I think, within that's exactly sort of what Gutierrez is talking about is that like things can be extremely bleak, like an entire country without protection from eviction, and people, constantly getting evicted from their homes in winter, very near Christmas, I guess, which is seemingly ironic, but that they knew that they could fight together and they could win and they could change the world and well, they could change their city at least, right?
Hmm.
Um, Also, too, I was thinking about I'm sure everyone's seen them by now, but there are these really fantastic videos after the Starbucks workers in Buffalo won a union, which is a pretty big deal as well. I mean, there's all kinds of things to be said about that for sure, but there's this like fantastic videos of the workers like sitting together and they're watching the NLRB read the vote count over Zoom, and they learn that they've won the first store and they all just like lose their minds about it, right? They're jumping up and down and screaming, and it's like this like moment where like the hope that they had, that struggle that we were talking about last week, it kind of comes to fruition and like they win. And there's like some real joy in that as well. But it's amazing because it's like, it's not just that they won this one battle, but it's like that they felt empowered enough that they know that like they could probably win other battles too. And in fact, like anyone could do that were they organized. So I guess to me there's something about like joy, you see somebody win some kind of battle, some kind of thing, right? And it seems like, okay, big deal. It's like one union, big deal. It's one city. But I think like the recognition in those moments of joy is that like it's not just one union, it's not just one city. It's like the whole world could be different.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that too. That angle of, it's important to create space for joy to be a real thing that we allow ourselves to feel. I think sometimes on the left, there's this kind of feeling that like if it's bad news, it must be true, or like the most true opinion you can have is the
Yeah.
worst picture you can paint of the world around you, right? And there's a real reticence to give yourself over to the vulnerability of celebration, or like the a real openness to feeling joyful about it. And I think that that is such a damaging impulse on the left. I mean, it's true. Nobody wants to be a sucker. You don't want to like celebrate something preemptively. You don't want to, let your guard down so much that you can't really understand the limitations of the one that you might have had. But at the same time, like if you can never really lean into that moment of joy, you're also going to have a tough time, not only kind of, I guess, building a momentum that's necessary, but you're also going to have a tough time, like being in genuine solidarity with other people in the world who are experiencing that joy all the time, right? Like, you're mentioning these tangible examples. I think that's really helpful. One that I saw recently was at Development and Peace. We've been highlighting a situation in Honduras where there are some land defenders from the Lenca people there who were incarcerated under unjust charges. There's a bunch of stuff going on in it. It's great. You should go to our website and learn about it. It's all very good stuff to know about. But there was a video that one of our partners in Honduras released of two of these land defenders being released from jail. And the video is amazing because it's like they're coming out to a community that is waiting for them to receive them, and they like everybody's so pumped and excited about it. Like they lift them up on their shoulders and they're kind of like crowd surfing with their pieces of paper saying that they're out, and like it's such an amazing just moment of like earned joy, I guess, like joy that is the product of like a lot of struggle and a lot of hope and a lot of refusal to like give up, even when your friend or your comrade or compañero is sitting in a cell. And I think that's really important to sort of let that joy be some fuel, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, I think that's the joy is the fuel is like a great way to sum up sort of like the weird Christian eschatology of or the ways that joy is wrapped up in Christian eschatology, right? Like in Christianity, like the end of the world is already set, and like I don't know, bad things could happen, but you know that like whatever, it's not the last word, it's not the end. That in the end, I mean, like God wins, and that means like that the people win as well. Um, maybe in light of all of that, let's read one more bit here from Gustavo Gutierrez.
Hmm.
This is from an interview he did with American Magazine called Remembering the Poor. And he says a little bit something about joy at the very end. So the interviewer asks him, how do you sustain the virtues of joy and hope during difficult times? A great question specifically for this podcast right now. So Gustavo Gutierrez says this: Christian joy is not tied to a particular object, but to the experience of God's unconditional love for us. Christian joy comes from knowing God and trying to follow God's will. Joy means rejoicing in God. But we can see from the Magnificat that when Mary rejoices in God, she is also celebrating the liberating action of God in history. Mary rejoices in a God who is faithful to the poor. Our service of others may be wrapped up in this joy. Only work embraced with joy truly transforms. So I like this a lot because on the one hand, the first half of the explanation is like what you might hear in like any kind of church. Even not from a liberation theologian, right? That joy is about knowing God and it's about God loving you and God's got your back or whatever. Even this big sort of like end of history, God's going to reconcile all things to God or whatever. But the extra step of adding in the Magnificat, I think, is really important because you have to recognize too that um when when you see these like liberating moments in the world, whether it's like workers being liberated from their boss and they win a union, or it's land defenders like winning winning like sort of sovereignty or some type of dignity or control of their land, or people not people in the Midwest having the right to an attorney when they're about to lose their house. Like these are the acts of this is what the Magnificat is about. This is about the mighty being torn from their thrones. This is about God loving you unconditionally. This is about God at the end of history reconciling all things to God's self. It's all tied up in these moments, sort of transhistorically or something. Maybe that's that's not a good word to use. I don't know, but you get what I'm saying is that like there's this sort of promissory note in Christianity that things in the end will be sort of reconciled in a way that is just right.
Hmm.
And when you see these things actually working out in the world where things are reconciled in the way that are just, when people do erupt in joy when they win something, when they win like real justice in the world, like that's the process of the history that Christians are promised.
Yeah, and I think too, okay, so we're kind of identifying like a few angles on joy here, right? We're just talking about sort of the earned joys that you get from the struggle, and then also this kind of eschatological joy, or the joy that you can participate in by, leaning into the belief that things will be different because God is helping us get there or whatever. And I think there's also this kind of third joy, maybe, or third angle on it that Gutierrez was hinting at that maybe we could pull out a little more. There's another quote that pulls it out further. This is in that Robert McAfee Brown book where he's quoting Gutierrez. He says, the joy of the poor is always a challenge to the powerful and raises questions they are incapable of understanding because all they see is deep suffering. But the poor know how to be joyful, they know how to have parties, and in the religious sphere, they know how to celebrate the presence of God. I would wager that the powerful of this world feel more serene when the people are silent, when they are resigned, even when they weep. What is disturbing to them is that the poor laugh in the midst of their situation. And I think that's kind of a maybe just this third angle because it's like a joy that is not really, I said earlier, it's like not setting out to be subversive. It just so happens to be because it's a proof, I guess, that you can't really erase just that basic experience of human beings getting together. It's this kind of recognition that joy is something that you work for sometimes. It's the product of a belief sometimes, but it's also just something that like is present. And like there's something really liberating about that as well, of knowing that people in power are definitely comfortable if you sort of, if the people that they are lording over are not not just not compliant, or not just compliant, but also like quiet about it, right? Or like sad about it. Like sad people don't rise up, right? But people who do kind of have something to lose or have something to lean into or have that experience of joy or those little flashes of joy to kind of keep them going, that is a genuinely sort of dangerous thing that you can't really completely turn off in the world.
You heard it here, folks. Christmas is coming. be joyful and also subsequently be ungovernable, I guess. Have such a rowdy Christmas that there's nothing your boss can do about it to ruin it.
That's right.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, I think that's good. All right, so we've done it. The world is bad, things are bad, times are tough, but nevertheless, you can try your best to be joyful, and if you win, maybe you'll even earn it. If you believe in God, if you haven't won yet, maybe you can. That's the joy hack. You can get around it, and worst case scenario, you can't do either of those things. You can, I don't know, play a video game or see a baby smile at you. I don't know, whatever does it for you. But
whatever non-religious people get up to, I'm not sure. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can get into that for sure.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. There you can get a cool invite to our secret Discord channel. It's not a secret. We're telling you about it all the time. We're never shutting up about this Discord channel, but you can get there and talk to us, I guess. You can also get some stickers, or we also have a behind the paywall podcast, and we've been slacking on it. It's been hard. The holidays, it's a tough time, but we're joyful in that it's going to happen sometime soon. I bet
we'll get back to it one of these days. We'll get back to it definitely between Christmas and New Year's at least. That much I can say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Our intro music is by Mario Armstrong, and our outro music is by The Logical Spoon. We'll see you next time.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would have